Welcome everyone to our final session of the Student Ambassadors Program. This is Rolando speaking, and I am joined today by the Student Ambassador leads, Natasha, Emily, and Hannah, also by Leslie from Teach Access, and Dave Boone, one of our project team members. Also with us is Lainey Feingold, who is going to be our speaker today. We would like to start by asking, how are you doing today? How are you feeling? You can always use emojis, reactions, or type the words in the chat. We're seeing some thumbs up, happy faces. Good. Many people in very cold places.
Kate looks very cold.
Yes, currently freezing. So I just shared the link to the agenda for today, so you can follow along to what we'll be doing. A bit of housekeeping before we start. Remember to keep yourself muted when not actively speaking. We have captions available. You can click the captions button at the bottom of the screen. Drop any questions you might have in the chat, or DM me or any of the other facilitators. You're always welcome to have your camera on or off as you like. Whenever you're speaking, introduce yourself. For example, saying this is Rolando speaking, this is Leslie speaking, etc. Throughout the program or throughout the session, we might be addressing challenging and or sensitive topics that may evoke strong emotions and differing perspectives. We always encourage you to acknowledge your privilege in the space, be mindful of the potential impact of your words on others, and prioritize creating a safe and supportive environment for all participants, and always engage with respect, empathy, and constructive language. Ask questions, and let's approach this session with a commitment to promoting understanding and growth. So in the agenda, we are including a recap. We also sent this recap yesterday or the day before, and it's a recap of the most important takeaways from each of the sessions we have so far. The first one was related to disability, and we defined disability and the types of disabilities, also how ableism is present in many of the spaces in society and culture, even in academia. And we talk about some of these. We also, in our second session, explore assistive technology and the ways assistive technology help people with disabilities, but also could help other people as well. And we also even talk about how artificial intelligence could also be an assistive technology if used correctly and if developed appropriately. And for the last session, we talked about the principles of accessibility and the web content accessibility guidelines. And we talk about different ways we could make virtual and physical spaces more accessible. And today the topic is advocating for accessibility, the power of Teach Access Student Ambassadors. And our facilitator is Lainey Feingold of LF Legal. Lainey is a disability rights lawyer who has worked to make the digital world more accessible since 1995. And she helped negotiate the first web accessibility agreement in the United States in 2000. Lainey has developed practices, structured negotiation, a dispute resolution and collaboration strategy that avoids lawsuits and focuses on lasting change and relationship building. So I'll leave it up to Lainey to lead the discussion.
Thanks, Rolando, and good morning, everyone. It's good afternoon to some of you. I'm here in California. So yeah, I'm on the board of Teach Access, which is a real honor and joy for me. And it's also an honor and joy to be with the Student Ambassador Gathering this morning. I can't tell you how important it is, the work that you're doing as part of Teach Access and as part of your advocacy, because, you know, as Rolando said, I've been in it a long time. My visual description of myself is I'm a white woman with a lot of gray and white hair. which is to say, I've been in it for a long time. That's my most salient feature. And there have been tremendous changes, and advocacy has really paid off. And we have so much further to go. And having the kind of ground level, campus level advocacy that you all are doing is, I think, part of the magic ticket to make an inclusive digital world. So I really thank Teach Access and all of you for what you do. I titled this talk, Advocating for Accessibility, the Power of Teach Access, Student Ambassadors, because I do honestly believe that you have power. I was talking to Rolando when we started, like, I don't want anyone to walk away, oh my God, I have all this power, and what am I doing? One of my key philosophies, which I'll talk about in a bit, is the importance and value of celebrating small steps, small achievements. In my work, I started in 1995. I was a lawyer, and blind people came to me and my colleagues and said, there's not a single ATM in the United States we can use because none of them talk. And we don't even have independent access to our own money. And we wrote to Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Citibank, and said, there's a problem here because the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was 5 years old at the time, requires independent access and inclusion and prevents discrimination. But here, every blind person in the country doesn't have access to their own money. And our goal there was that in every location where you could find an ATM in the country, you would find a talking ATM, which is a term we coined because there wasn't any such thing at the time. And because we worked really closely with the blind community and blind individuals, and we didn't file a lawsuit, we instead built a relationship with the banks. At the end of the day, we got talking ATMs, and we had a major, gigantic press release because we got 5 of them. We didn't wait till we got all of them, which eventually we did. We celebrated the first 5, and that taught me all small steps matter. And every single thing I've done in my career started with something small. So I just want to, as we talk about power, I just want you to know that I'm not talking about, changing your entire campuses. Whatever you're doing is using your power to advocate for accessibility. So thank you for that. I have a website, lflegal.com. I write a lot for non-lawyers on digital accessibility, as well as structured negotiations, collaborative problem solving, the strategies of collaborative problem solving. Doesn't have to be legally relevant. I'm on social media at LF Legal, used to be more on Twitter, occasionally still on Twitter, also on Mastodon Social, also on LinkedIn. And I have the date, and you can see in the background of my slide, I have a dolphin. And that is to represent, we'll talk about the dolphins in a minute, that is to represent, if I said to you right now, I should have said this before I told you it was a dolphin, if you think of a lawyer, what do you think of? And a lot of people say, I think of a shark. And there's a whole history back 100 years about lawyers being associated with sharks. And I'm not interested in being a shark. I don't think it's a good skill for advocacy. So if I say shark, I do trainings on structured negotiation. I say, what do you think of? And people will say, oh my God, like bloodthirsty and greedy and dangerous and fearsome. And who wants to do something for someone who comes across like that? So the dolphin is my spirit animal and my icon. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, and you'll see it in the background of some of the slides. So what I would like to talk about today's roadmap. First of all, my image is a Golden Gate Bridge because that's what I see out my window. I have worked from home long before there was such a thing called remote work, since about 1996, because I also have 2 daughters. And at the time, I felt like working in a disability nonprofit just didn't jive with my idea of the kind of mother I wanted to be. So I've been working right here in my upstairs bedroom since that time. Now they are grown and teachers themselves. So I see the Golden Gate Bridge, and on our roadmap, I want to talk a little bit about what is digital accessibility. I know you've already had conversations about that. I like to share big picture ideas of how to think about digital accessibility, because it's very easy in this space to get very bogged down with, oh my God, which WCAG web content accessibility guideline requirement, and is the design right, and the development and the marketing. There's so many roles to all this. I think we need to also hold on to the big picture. And that's another thing I love about Teach Access and the work that you're doing is we're not trying to teach every single person every single detail about accessibility. We're trying to get across the why and the importance of it. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about the kinds of power I see you as having and how you can effectively use your power. So there'll be plenty of time for questions at the end. I can't really, let's see, can I modify? If you have something burning, you can put it in the chat and, Rolando or Leslie, Kate, if something feels burning or unclear, just jump right in, interrupt, and we could take a pause for questions. Otherwise, we'll do the questions at the end. So yeah, okay. What is digital accessibility with the jumping dolphins in the back? I like this short version definition, which is digital accessibility is disability inclusion in all things tech, disability inclusion in all things tech, and the intentional practices that make inclusion happen. The intentional practices that make inclusion happen. Sometimes I say digital accessibility is the engine of disability inclusion in tech. But I think the key thing is to never lose sight of digital accessibility as a necessary piece of disability inclusion, and that we need intentional practices to make it happen. I have a great quote I often use, which I think is sitting on my desk from a talk I did yesterday, which is early intentional acts of inclusion help you prevent future unintentional acts of exclusion. And in all the work you're doing on your campuses, really that's what you're doing. Early intentional acts of inclusion help you prevent future acts of exclusion. So that's my big definition. If you have a 1 or 2 sentence definition of how you like to talk about digital accessibility on your campus, I'd love to hear it. Put it in the chat and we can go over it. We can go over it when we do the Q&A part. So that's my big picture definition. I also like to think of digital accessibility as a bridge. And the reason I say digital accessibility is a bridge is because as I look at this bridge and in this image, which, I think is New York, but I can't remember now. I didn't make a note of it. Or the Golden Gate Bridge, I picture people with disabilities on one side and all the content and technology of today on the other. And accessibility is what connects. So you've already talked about disability, and there's no one definition. There's many kinds of disabilities. There's many disabled people who need different things, all stranded, all excluded if we don't have digital accessibility to the technology. And when I started out, it was very exciting when we got the first web accessibility agreement, because that was really all the technology we were talking about. Our blind clients came to us and said, you did a good job with those talking ATMs, but there's this new thing called online banking. I hadn't even heard of online banking. There was barely ATMs when we first started. They exploded during the time of our negotiation. So technology was web accessibility, and people still talk about web accessibility. Maybe 5 years ago, we switched to this phrase digital accessibility. When we did that first web accessibility agreement, there was no app store. There was no iPhone. There was no mobile banking. Now, of course, digital is everything. And especially on campuses, you can't be a student, a professor, a worker with a disability without using technology. So digital accessibility to me is the bridge. And I like to say it's a bridge of, I think I wrote it here, connecting disabled people to technology and digital content. I feel like people need, even today, we're so immersed in the world of accessibility that we think, oh, everybody knows what accessibility is. But a lot of people think accessibility is, oh yeah, I can get on the internet. But I find these short versions, like digital accessibility is a bridge, very helpful in talking to people, especially when we talk about digital accessibility. If you don't have the bridge, people are excluded. because in my view, most of the barriers to accessibility are not really intentional. Nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I want to exclude disabled people from my course content or from participating in programs on my campus, but people don't know. And if we talk to them in, language that's very specific about exclusion and inclusion, I think it's really helpful. So that's one way I talk about it. Another way is digital access is a door. I love this picture of a really closed up door that looks like it's been closed up forever because the paint is peeling and there's a lock with a key and there's a chain lock, and to represent that digital accessibility, without it, the door is closed. The door is closed to participating as a student, to getting course materials on time, to being able to participate in class. Haben Girma, in her wonderful book, which I hope you have read, called The Deafblind Woman Who Conquered Harvard Law School, she talks about an experience in her college where she couldn't have access to the menu. So even the dining hall, what was on the menu that day, until she convinced them to open that door of exclusion and give her the menu in a digital format, which she could read. So I like to think of digital accessibility as changing this closed door, which is on the screen now, to this open door with the light pouring through. Maybe a little bit corny, the light, it sort of feels like big glorious day outside, but you know what? A closed door versus an open door is a advocacy tool I've used because, again, nobody wants to exclude people. Most people don't. So I see it as a door to disability inclusion. Yeah, and some other ideas that I use in my advocacy that I think can be helpful. This is the London Bridge, because accessibility is global. Digital accessibility is privacy and security for disabled students, plus. So if I refer to students here, I'm talking about your entire campus ecosystem of staff and workers and students and students to be and alumni, everyone. So privacy and security, like if you have a healthcare system on campus, if the healthcare system was designed to have confidential information that people can independently access, which of course it should, because healthcare is a private issue, if it's not accessible, the person with a disability who needs access, they don't have privacy. They don't have security. Privacy and security is broken whenever we don't have accessibility. So accessibility is privacy and security for disabled students, plus. Essential to diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'd be curious on your campuses if you want to put it in the chat. Some people are starting to use DEIA for diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Someone used IDEA, inclusion, diversity, equality, and accessibility, but IDEA is shorthand for the law in the United States that gives students the right to a equal education, K-12. So we have to be careful with all the acronyms, but regardless of what you call it, you can't have diversity, equity, and inclusion without accessibility, because you can't have disability inclusion without accessibility. Digital accessibility is a civil right for people with disabilities. I do a lot of talks on what's happening in the legal space, both here and international. And I always say, why is a lawyer sitting here talking to you about accessibility? Because most of the audience that I usually speak with are developers, designers, managers, people who are doing the hard work of creating accessibility on the ground. A lot of disabled student program people and librarians and course managers, people like that. The reason a lawyer is in this space, the reason I'm in this space, is because digital accessibility is a civil right. Digital accessibility is a civil right of disabled people, because without it, there's no participation, there's no inclusion, and there's no independence. So, yeah, so those are my big picture ideas: the door, the bridge, the privacy and security. Everybody we talk to has a different idea of themselves, as we'll talk about in a minute. So we kind of need a lot of things in our pockets as advocates, some people care about money, so we have to talk about how digital accessibility is more effective and efficient to build things accessible from the beginning than to have to do one-off accommodations for individuals who really just need accessible technology. Some people want to hear about money. Some people want to hear about civil rights. Some people want to hear about privacy. So I like having all these definitions as part of the advocacy toolbox. So those are my definitions. Back to the roadmap. So that's my ideas about what is digital accessibility. Now I want to talk about what kinds of power I see you all having, what kind of power you have to advocate for accessibility on your campuses. So the bridge building power. Here's another bridge. So if accessibility is a bridge, you have the power to build bridges of connection, to bring people together around accessibility, whether it's within your classroom, within your friendship group, within any student organizations you're involved with, always connecting, which is also very gratifying on a personal level. I mean, to me, like I said, I work here out of the bedroom and, I do have a very nice view. I am by myself. However, I am also part of a global accessibility community, which is very rewarding to me. I mean, I like waking up in the morning and having emails from other time zones that talk about the issues we're all talking about. So your bridge building power, connecting people, I think is very important. Power to open doors. I picked an image with a lot of press to operate door buttons with the traditional wheelchair symbol in blue, because just like an automatic door opener is opening doors, you all are opening doors, creating connections, creating participation, being able to, anytime you have the smallest of wins, you're a civil rights enforcer because you're opening doors. So that's another one of the powers I see you as having. Power to create culture and community. And this is a smiling group of, I don't know for sure if they're college students, but they look like college students. One's using a wheelchair. And this I think is probably the biggest, most important thing that I've seen, the power to create culture and community. And the reason structured negotiation as a collaborative strategy has been effective is because disabled people are front and center in the process. Usually in a law environment like a lawsuit, the lawyers have to do most of the talking. But in structured negotiation, the reason we were able to convince banks to do talking ATMs without a lawsuit, do accessible websites, later to do accessible mobile apps, is because the bankers knew blind people, because we created meetings, just like you guys have the power to create culture by gatherings, by learnings, by small experiments, by creating feedback channels that people have an opportunity to share on the campus. This is working, this isn't working. So I have an email somewhere that a banking guy wrote to me. I don't know why I saved this. I printed it out. I'm so glad I did. And it's from 2001, after he had met some of our blind clients who didn't have access to their own money. And one of those clients is a woman named Kim Charlson. I don't know if any of you are in Massachusetts. She's a real blind activist. She's not just Massachusetts, but nationally and globally. And this banker wrote to me in 2001 and said, when I saw Kim Charlson literally jump up and down with happiness at being able to get $20 out of her own bank account, it changed how I think as a banker. It changed how I think as a banker. That wouldn't happen without a very large number of meetings where bankers got to know blind people. And that has been replicated throughout my work in this space. We do a lot of work on talking prescription labels, because a traditional print label is of no use to people who cannot see or read that label. And, when we got pharmacists in a room with blind people, and the pharmacist heard that without talking labels, blind people do things like wrap one rubber band around one prescription and keep it in the kitchen, and two rubber bands around another prescription and keep it in the bathroom to keep it straight. pharmacists don't go into pharmacy because they want people to risk their lives not knowing what their medications are. And because we had that relationship and those gatherings with blind pharmacy users and pharmacists, we have agreements with Walmart and CVS and many other pharmacies in the United States. And I attributed it all to this power to create community and culture, even in that corporate environment. So that's another one of the powers I see as you all. And celebrations. I put down here celebrations like Global Accessibility Awareness Day. I think this week, I don't think it's today. I think December 3rd is International Day of Persons with Disabilities. There's so many things to celebrate on the disability calendar. Really gives you a great opportunity on your campuses to just bring people together informally to talk about accessibility in a inclusive, civil rights, good for privacy, good for students, good for staff kind of way, and not in any, oh, this is some legal requirement that you have to do. Power to support students and employees. These are two images of, one is an image of students, and one is an image of workers, the mixed race, mixed gender of people in this picture. Because when we talk about accessibility, we're supporting individuals to do their jobs, to be students, and that's a tremendous power. And this is where I'm thinking, I don't want you to feel, well, I can't do anything about the employees on my campus. No, of course, you may not be able to, but bringing the idea of accessibility and the teach access ideas into your campus in all different sorts of ways, you can't really predict what the ripples of that are going to be. If you hold a gathering, who's going to be there? Who's going to get an idea that can help them individually? So I really encourage you to think about your power in these sort of bigger ways than it may feel possible. It may feel possible because even I, at this stage of my, in the stage of my career, I say, it's still very rewarding to hear from people, oh, well, I had never thought about accessibility as privacy before. And knowing that, I was able to talk to so-and-so and get access where I needed it. So to me, this is a really big power on campus, both students and staff. Power to advance your school's reputation. Put some Oscars here, Oscar statutes. Are you a disability-friendly college? Which I discovered in preparing for this, that of course, there's rankings for everything. And I'm not saying they're good or bad, but there are rankings, and having, a strong teach access presence and a strong digital accessibility presence can, hopefully that's something counted in the, are you a disability friendly college? I always say to people that, Microsoft, Google, they do national advertising on some of their accessibility programs. And yes, they want disabled people to know about it. And it's good for business because everyone wants to work with a company that's doing the right thing. So I would think the same would be true on campuses. I don't know what sort of occasions there are to celebrate. Nationally, I'm not really big on competition in this way, but I know it exists out there. And so advertising that you're a disability-friendly college because of the college's commitment, the institution's commitment to accessibility, or involvement with Teach Access, or having Teach Access ambassadors on your campus, to me, that's good for anyone who's interested in the school because it sends a message about the values of the school for everybody. So yeah, and the power to drive change. This all really sums up that you really have the power to drive change. So how do you do it? How can you effectively use your power? Okay, the first way I think to think about how to effectively use your power is to don't use your power ineffectively, which I think I have a song for. Let's see. Well, it doesn't seem to be playing, but the Imperial, oh yes, here we go. The Imperial March, and Darth Vader is showing on the screen. I say this, and I play this song to say that we're all passionate about the work we do. And someone once asked me in a talk, well, how can you like be collaborative? If we're talking about civil rights, how can you be friendly? How can you be kind? How can you be patient? Which are all things that I think are advocacy skills. And I don't feel that being kind and friendly and patient detract from my commitment to accessibility. And I don't think hitting people over the head with, oh, this is a legal requirement and you have to do this, and this is a bad campus, I don't think that brings change. And in my experience as advocates, and I know this is hard, and sometimes it is so frustrating that you don't want to be nice, but I think, and it's not just nice, but that's one of the things. If we think of it as a strategy for change, and we don't think about using power over, like in Star Wars, the Darth Vader does, then I think we can get a lot further. Okay, avoiding fear, kind of related to the Darth Vader thing. I have here, fear is a liar, and another Star Wars quote, fear is a path to the dark side. Fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. And I like this quote because so much around the law is about fear. Well, you're going to get sued if you don't do this. I do recommend being familiar with, and I can give to Rolando and the team some resources for being familiar with what happens when campuses do get sued or get a Department of Justice complaint or get a structured negotiation. It's important to know it, but not to lead with fear. So to me, that's an important part of using your power effectively, is not to lead with fear, and to understand people's fear, because let's be honest, people are afraid of people with disabilities. There's a lot of fear and misunderstanding. And I think our jobs, I love the Teach Access title, student ambassador, because you guys are really ambassadors for change on your campus. And like the pharmacists, they said to us at the beginning with the talking labels, well, we can't do talking labels because a blind person might hear something and mishear it and take the wrong medication. And if we were in a confrontational situation, we'd like, are you ridiculous? Right now, they don't get any information. But we weren't, and we had to respect that fear. And we had to say, well, why don't you meet some blind people and see what it means to not have talking labels? And by respecting their fear and unpacking it and change it, that was critical to that advocacy effort. No shortcuts or checklists. Very important to avoid that when we're talking about accessibility. It's not enough. The WCAG is important. It's not enough to have a campus say, well, we do WCAG for our websites. Accessibility is not a checklist. Accessibility is not driven by fear, which is why I have a big X over these things. Don't be a shark. As I said before, this is playing the Jaws theme, big X on the shark. Just think of your own like personal life. If you want something from someone, you wouldn't give it to the person if they were shark-like. You don't have to act like a shark either. And I love this picture of the little goldfish with the shark fin on it in the water, because I feel like a lot of us, myself included, and you're hearing me now after practicing structured negotiation and collaboration for 27 years. I wasn't always like this. You know, I too was shark-like. I too used to feel, you know, especially as a woman. And, you know, I've had some good conversations in my training with people of color, especially women of color, about how, you know, if you want to be a dolphin and you want to be kind, you don't always get the same respect as, especially now, I get as an older white woman who's been involved with this so long. So I'm not saying, you know, change your personality. I'm not saying this always works. Sometimes, like I had a woman say at the last training, like, I am not listened to because I am a Black woman, and I can't form relationship because the other side is not respecting me. So I just want to acknowledge that that is something that happens and makes this job of being dolphin-like that much harder and more complex. Whenever possible, I do think that being able not to be shark-like and not to be put the shark fins on is important. Okay, so don't act like a shark. You use your accessibility power effectively with the picture of Yoda and the Star Wars theme, which is so much more uplifting. be a dolphin, power with. I use this image of two dolphins smiling, eating fish out of a plastic container. Why? Because this was a National Geographic experiment that I read about where the fish was in the container, and to get it out, they had to work together. They had to work together to get it out, which they did. And that's kind of how I've been doing the work. Cute little dolphin sounds chirping in the background. I do this with collaboration, with curiosity about what the person you're advocating with is thinking, with patience, try to break down silos because allies are everywhere, break down school silos, fulfill the school's mission together. I'm sure you can go on your campus website and find many things about the inclusive, welcoming, a lot of adjectives that can help us in our accessibility advocacy. Always like to give that back to whoever I'm talking to. Well, even working with Walmart, known to never settle anything, they were the first ones to do the talking labels because we were able to communicate them and play on how they saw themselves, celebrate small experiments, know who you're talking to. This is so important. This is a cat looking in a mirror seeing a lion because everyone you're talking to, student, faculty, staff, whomever, student groups, sees themselves in a certain way. And our job is to find out, what do they care about? What are their values? What is their worry? And how does accessibility fit in? Because I've never had a time where accessibility didn't fit in somewhere. No one wants to exclude. People don't want to have privacy violations, all the things we talked about earlier. So when I'm doing advocacy, and what I recommend in your advocacy is always know who you're talking to. There's never can be a canned speech. It's always about relationships, and always, always engage disabled people. It's been the ticket to my success. Tap into disability resources on campus, work with students with disabilities, bring in your friends and colleagues who are disabled, including yourself, of course, bring in disabled speakers, partner with a disability nonprofit, and be proactive. Be proactive in creating these relationships, not reactive, and have fun. That was my last message. So dolphin skills or advocacy skills, like I said, a quick list to accompany these two cute dolphins: trust, having active patience, small steps in celebration, practicing kindness, practicing listening, practicing equanimity, which to me is just not getting riled when we hear things that are super upsetting, which we will, and having empathy and having hope and optimism, because Helen Keller says nothing can be accomplished without hope and optimism. So that's what I got. I have the last slide. I think it's the last slide that says advocacy on your campus. And where are your allies? So I'd like to stop it there, and maybe we could take that up as the first feedback question or other comments that are in the chat. Okay, Rolando or Leslie, should I take a look at the chat, or do you want to do that? Or
Yes, hi, this is Rolando speaking. There are a couple of comments regarding what you've been sharing about advocating. Certainly your quotes have resonated with the group. Amanda shares that that's a huge thing about the last thing. Everything in my institution is a solid. No one is taking a bird's eye view and connecting the silos, which to Kate responds absolutely and truthfully. Your institution is not the only one who operates like that. We're building your network within and outside can be so helpful to break those down.
yeah, the silo thing, sometimes I show a picture of silos. That is a problem. I mean, that's another good point that someone just made. Like, you're not alone. That's another thing about being part of the Teach Access program, because everyone is experiencing the same things. And you know what? It's not just on campus. In the corporate world, where I do a lot of my work and a lot of public speaking, everybody's talking about silos. Like procurement is a really big issue. What are your campuses buying? And how do you stop, what do you say, don't buy broken technology, i.e. don't buy things that are inaccessible, are the procurement people involved in any of these conversations? Usually no, they're off in a silo. So anything that can be done to break down the silos is so important.
There's a question from Emily in the chat. Have there been any specific initiatives on a certain college campus that have caught your eye as good examples of advocacy?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to think about that, and I'll send it to Teach Access and they'll share. What I mostly know about what's happening on college campuses is either from teams on campuses like Harvard, for example. I don't know if anyone on here is from Harvard, but they have a wonderful accessibility program led by an accessibility team. Now, they did get a lawsuit before that started, but they took that lawsuit, in my mind, as a initiative to really do great work in accessibility. And I don't know if you're all part of the Association of Higher Education Ahead, I forget what it's called for now, and called now, where you can find out more. They have these conferences more about which campuses are real leaders in doing the accessibility. And I also have resources on which campuses have gotten lawsuits. And the reason I mention that is not to say, ha, they got a lawsuit, but the results of the good lawsuits are settlement agreements where you can really see a path towards fuller accessibility. So there's a woman named Laura Carlson. I don't know, Kate, if you have the link right here quick. She keeps a website. She's at the University of Minnesota of all the accessibility lawsuits and complaints against college campuses. And it kind of creates, in the settlement, you see a roadmap to different things you can do on the campus to make sure it's fully accessible. Oh, good. Yes. Thank you for having it bookmarked. I'm always losing that. Yeah, you wouldn't, yeah, Emily, you say that's an interesting approach to finding examples of change. I mean, the law can be a good motivator for change. Unfortunately, in the United States right now, there's a lot of lawsuits that don't result in lasting change, but there are a lot that do, because when lawyers, I distinguish between ethical lawyers and non-ethical lawyers. When ethical lawyers handle cases, there's a commitment for the long haul. Same with corporations. When we do a case, we're in it for a long haul because accessibility doesn't happen overnight. The most recent 2 college cases, I just did a legal update yesterday in the US, and I mentioned the Los Angeles Community College District case where there was actually a jury verdict of over $200,000 for not providing accessible course software in math and science. That's still up in the air. The jury awarded it. The judge is going to decide. And then there was a settlement with the City University of New York that the U.S. Attorney, part of the Department of Justice, did in New York that lays out what the university is going to do. So I don't know. I'll talk to Teach Access team. Maybe we'll put together like a little legal briefing you guys can have if that would be helpful. As long as you don't use it with fear and, Darth Vader. That's a trick, like knowing about the law and talking about it in a way that, this is good. It provides us a roadmap. We don't have to be afraid of it, but we want to be proactive so we can avoid it on our own campus. I think that's sort of the frame.
Yes, there's another question from Hannah. Hannah asked, what has been the biggest change regarding accessibility that you've seen since you started working in it?
Well, that's a very good question. As I said, nothing can be accomplished without hope and optimism. So I'm very optimistic. One thing is, when I started, having a company like Microsoft that has a chief accessibility officer and an entire program of accessibility. I don't know if you use Microsoft tools. I use a Mac, but I use Microsoft tools. If you don't know already, there's a accessibility checker in all their products in Word and PowerPoint, so you can go through and find out what accessible barriers are in the document, and not just how to fix them, but why. Because really the biggest thing we can do as advocates is explain people the why of it. that we're talking about not excluding disabled people. That was not on the agenda for any corporation, especially not somebody like Microsoft. So that's probably one of the biggest things. There's been a lot. There's been a lot, I'm a person who likes to talk about the improvements. There's a long way to go still. And there's, the whole idea of cognitive accessibility, what people with cognitive disabilities need for access. That was not really on the radar. When I started, it was mostly, all the work I've done is with blind people. And it was mostly that because when technology came for blind people, it was a total stopper. As time went on and there's more video, the lack of captions and sign language interpreters, total stopper for deaf people. So you can see the history over time of more and more accessibility, and still a long way to go, which, to take it back to the beginning, is why I think programs like this and your roles as student ambassadors is just so important, because the more people you can touch on your campus with the why of it, why this matters, the better answer we're going to have when someone asks somebody this question 20 years from now.
Amanda is sharing in the chat that all these big tech companies have specific accessibility resources too, and she mentions Microsoft, Apple, and Google.
Another advocacy thing is your campuses have relationships with these companies. Microsoft likes to go and show, if you're a campus that people are using Microsoft products, Apple, they like to come and explain what they're offering for accessibility. And you can use them, you can partner with the big companies and say, do you have someone who can do a presentation on the Microsoft accessibility tools? And they may well have somebody. So it's good because campuses, it's one thing to hear it from people like us, like you, like me. It's another thing to hear it from Microsoft. So to the extent we can bring, I'm going to add that to this PowerPoint. I think it's a good idea. To the extent we can bring in companies who are already leaders into the advocacy effort, I think the better.
Yeah. Amanda says that she works for Gallaudet University, and she will plug Apple for their awesome collaboration. She shares a link to their newsroom about something between Apple and their university. We also have another question from Emily. It has been so helpful to hear your accessibility insights from a legal perspective. How would you recommend finding your own niche when it comes to approaching and advocating for accessibility?
That is a very good question. I will tell you that when I was in law school, I wanted to be a union side labor lawyer. I became a union side labor lawyer. I did that work for 5 years. It became unsatisfying, and I pivoted to become a civil rights lawyer, and I was in a private law firm doing race and gender cases in lawsuits. And one day, when I was supposed to become a partner the next day, I was fired from that job, which was pretty much the worst thing that has happened to me in my legal career, or maybe my life. And because of that, I was like, oh no, what am I going to do? As I said, I have this house with the view of the Golden Gate Bridge. I had 2 little kids. And I took a 4-month internship at the Disability Rights Education Defense Fund. And that 4 months turned into 4 years. And during those 4 years, I became involved in the Talking ATM effort. And because it worked, when we first wrote the banks, there was nothing called structured negotiation. We just wrote the banks, in large part because I was a little bit afraid, oh my God, what if we do a lawsuit and screw up the ADA? It was only 5 years old for everybody, for all time. So we tried this negotiation thing. When it worked, I said, was that just luck? Or do we have something that we can replicate? And we decided to try to replicate it. And the first step was giving it this name called structured negotiation. I have a book about structured negotiation if you're interested, and it tells a story. And then it kept working. So I found my niche this way, which is to say, I think the key to finding a niche is to keep an open mind. Don't do, if you see yourself stuck, make a change. Try to find something that you're passionate about. there's so many ways to get involved with accessibility. All the different roles. Yesterday, when I did that talk for the legal update, there were 700 signups, and I had them send me a list of roles of people who signed up. And I mean, I almost had tears in my eyes. People were librarians and UX developers and course managers and accessibility advocates. And one guy ran a television program on the Food Network. It was like, yes, accessibility is everywhere. So you can find a place to be an accessibility advocate wherever your passion takes you.
Thanks. We have about 5 more minutes. Anyone else who wants to ask a question or share their comments, you can do it in the chat, or you can also unmute yourself and ask. Remember to introduce yourself when speaking. Hannah is saying that she loves the fact that accessibility is becoming more widespread.
Yeah, that's totally true. And with it, of course, you know, everything isn't rosy. We have a problem with the overlays, which are the one line of code pieces of software that sell themselves as solving all your accessibility problems. If you're not familiar with that, I encourage you to look at the overlayfactsheet.com. And if your campus is using one of these overlays, I encourage you to try to advocate around a change in that, if it fits within your time, space, agenda, because that was something that didn't exist before. And to me, it's very related to the fact that we also have a problem with too many unethical lawsuits just being filed around accessibility without the commitment to real change. So yeah, there's a lot to do. There's a lot to do. Yeah, Kate put it in the chat, the overlay fact sheet. But you know, in the closing minutes, I really believe, I really mean what I said at the beginning. I really thank you all for the work that you're doing, and I know how important it is, and I hope you can see yourselves as part of you're already seeing yourselves as part of a bigger movement by being so involved with Teach Access, which is beautiful. And also see yourself as part of a global movement too, because accessibility is global. I do have a global page on my website from the drop-down menu where this year I updated it, and over 30 people from around the world sent me their accessibility laws, and I linked to all the people who did that. And so those are good connections for accessibility in other countries, because accessibility is global and the advocacy is global too. You know, I'm going to India in a couple weeks, and I'm going to do a talk there. And I was wondering, well, when did India get its first talking ATM? Well, fortunately, the only thing written about that I could find right off the bat was from my own website, because 10 years after we did it in the US, the same company that made the US talking ATMs deployed them in India. So the work has ripples that you can't even imagine.
Yes. Any additional questions? Or if not, Lainey, just what would you say are the top 3 takeaways that from your talk? If you want the students to remember something and take it back and start thinking about it, what would you say it would be?
Ooh, that's good. That's a good question, and I should always think about that in advance. Well, what is your power to create community around accessibility? The importance of the why. I think that if we can educate people on why this matters, I believe in the power of good in humanity, and I don't think people want to exclude. And also the takeaway of, you know, taking accessibility down to what does it really mean? It means inclusion or exclusion. It's a bridge that connects. I think I like that bridge that connects thing probably best. So that might not have been 3, but I hope you took that away and other things. And I might have a closing slide with my, let's see, with my contact. Please feel free to be in touch with me through my website or my email, lf@lflegal.com, or you can always reach out to Rolando or anyone on the team, and happy to be in touch.
Thank you so much, Lainey. thank you for taking the time to come speak to the student ambassadors. We certainly enjoy hearing from you about the work you've been doing. It's been very informative, and I always enjoy hearing your talks. To all the students, we hope that you connect Lainey through any of those means. Also, we would appreciate if you would take some time to give us feedback on today's session. We always like to hear what you have to say about sessions, about the program, to help us improve and keep offering activities that are relevant to you. Like we mentioned, today is our last session. We will reconvene in the spring, but with another type of activities throughout the semester. We spent some time discussing and talking about the different topics that were discussed at the Student Academy. The Student Academy will continue with sessions each month on January 26th, February 9th, March 8th, and April 12th. For the student ambassadors, we will be conducting a design spring, a modified version of a design spring. And what we'll do each month is help you create and ideate an advocacy project at your institution. So this is the perfect way to start understanding the different ways you can advocate for accessibility at your institutions. You all have the power, like Lainey mentioned, to do big change, to create some change at your institution. It won't be creating this big initiative that will be accepted by everyone and adopted immediately, but you have the power to do the small changes to start creating a more accessible and inclusive institutions. So we appreciate your time. Again, thank you, Lainey, for your time. We will share the recording in the next couple of days, as well as some of the resources that were shared throughout the conference. And we will also send the dates for the spring session, so you can keep them in your calendars. Thank you, everyone, and have a great weekend.